John and I are good friends from high school. We graduated from Pioneer High in 1985, and we worked together at Pizza World. And John was a pizza maker. So was Brian and Pat. I don't know, whatever happened to Pat. That's a whole nother discussion. And then I was the dishwasher. So once in a while, I got to make pies, which was cool. And after high school, you went to junior college with me. We didn't actually hang out that much, but we were there together. And then you got your AS in criminal justice and went to be a peace officer for Belmont Police Department, correct?
Yeah. You kind of skipped this step, though. Actually, I got my AS.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, my AS in like industrial technology, welding and machine shop.
That's right. And you did that for a couple of years.
I did. I went and did that for about 7 years. And it wasn't until about 7 years later that I decided to change course and go into a completely different line of work. And that's something I'd never even really thought about before. But, it's just a career change.
Yeah, a pretty big one. And we hadn't talked. I mean, we haven't talked for many years actually until we had hung out at Gina's. And I've always had a lot of respect for you. And as I think I shared with you over dinner, the purpose of my podcast is to bring some pretty topical and sometimes controversial topics that I think are complex, and I don't think they should be discussed with venom on Facebook and Twitter, things like that. So I just had a podcast released this week about critical race theory. I had one on safe spaces. I think I talked to you about earlier. Next week, I'm talking about ideology and how it's dividing us. And defund the police is one of those topics, and one of those topics where I myself am unbelievably ignorant, specific to the training and the plight and the experience of police officers. And because you have such a storied career, and I don't want to embarrass you here, but I have your profile report here. And you started out in 1996 at Belmont, went to Santa Rosa Police Department in, 2 years later?
Yeah, about 2.5. It was in 94 I started in Belmont, and then came to Santa Rosa, which has been my home, at the end of 96, and retired in 2020. And you were promoted to sergeant in 1996? No, 2004.
2004. Oh, sorry, yeah, 2004, and then lieutenant in 2014.
Correct.
Okay, and so I highlighted some of these things here within your training and your certifications because part of this discussion in the zeitgeist is that police officers don't have the proper training. They don't have the proper funding. They need more. And these are lay people usually blathering on. And so I just wanted to kind of read some of the things that I've highlighted here. Over the years, you had significant training in officer safety field tactics, driver training. What is SNK, by the way, as far as an acronym? You have SNK knowledge mods, SNK sexual harassment, SNK psychological officer. I don't know what that means, but
those are all perishable skills.
Got it. And crime investigation, these are all training programs. Cognitive interviewing and statistical analysis, domestic violence updates, warrant investigations, emotional survival, CRI intervention, legislative updates, narcotic updates, active shooter patrol, computer digital evidence recovery, forensics data acquisition, gang awareness, supervisory courses, internal affairs, electronic surveillance, firearms, racial profiling, Sherman Block SLI, communication, keeping your edge, officer-involved shootings, ethics in law enforcement, domestic violence, firearms, management courses. And there's tons and tons of these, buddy. So I kind of wanted to, and maybe that's a good place to start with some of the narrative out there. What's the good part about the training you went through, not only as a peace officer early on, but then as a leader and commander of the Santa Rosa Police Department? What does that look like? What is it?
So we have two types of training. We have mandated training, which is mandated by post, which is the commission, the state commission that oversees policing in California, sets training standards. And most of that stuff is perishable skills, not all of it, but a lot of it is. We have to keep up on things that you have to do repeatedly, arrest and control, that sort of thing. And that's what everybody goes through. But then there's specialized training depending on what your job duty is. If you get assigned to investigations, detective team, if you're doing traffic enforcement, if that's your specialty, there's different collision investigation courses. It's a lot of training. I mean, it's thousands of hours of training over a career. I don't think it's enough. I think we need more training. I think police officers need more training along with the current training they're getting. They have to know. They have to be able to use the basic tools. You have to be able to arrest and control people without getting hurt, without hurting yourself, without hurting others. You got to know the law. You got to know the Constitution. You have to keep pounding that over and over again, because these police officers out on the street are making critical decisions in a matter of seconds or fractions of a second.
Yeah.
And that can have a real difference on the outcome of whatever the incident is. But I think, over the last few years, I think it's brought to light some of the things we really need to train in. I think we talked about this the other day about implicit bias, which everybody in the Santa Rosa Police Department has gone through that training. Okay. The county puts on a 36-hour mental health, dealing with people who are emotionally disturbed and have mental health issues. We try to get all of our, I think, I looked a couple of years ago, I think 75% of our officers had that. Probably less now with COVID, because it's a class you have to go to. But police officers in our community are asked to deal with so many different things than what you think. The average, if you talk to a 6-year-old kid and ask what a police officer does, they would have this minuscule little picture. They stop people and give them tickets, or they take bad guys to jail. And it's just, we know it's so much more than that. I mean, we are the 24/7 solution to literally every single problem in our community. And how do you train somebody to handle all of that and handle it perfectly? Because that's the expectation, right?
Right. Correct. And you mentioned something when we were preparing for this, and I asked you to kind of embellish this. You mentioned that your dispatch, and I don't remember what year it was 2019, had 225,000 calls through dispatch, something to that extent. And then can you talk about that as far as, because the width and breadth of that was staggering to me, how many calls you guys get through dispatch and how many men are then marshaled to go solve those problems. And then how few incidents were actually there.
Right. And of course, I'm only speaking for the Santa Rosa Police Department.
Correct.
That's who I worked for. I was a manager in that department as a lieutenant. And these numbers were important to us. We need to know what it is our staff is doing. How do we budget for that? How many people do we need? Our response times up to snuff? And when you look at a community we have a census coming out here pretty soon, but I think I could probably easily estimate we're probably a city of between 175 and 200,000 at this point.
Wow, it's grown a lot.
Which is it's a pretty good sized city, pretty decent size, and we're busy, But just to kind of shed some light on the numbers, I'm looking online because we did post them online for 2019. Our dispatch center received 255,224 calls. So those are actual phone calls that came into our dispatch center. And out of those 255,224 calls, dispatch created 137,690 calls for service. And we call it calls for service, which means that it's a call that somebody's going to get dispatched to. So I 95% of those probably are actual calls where a police officer goes to a scene, probably meets with somebody. I don't want to dive into the numbers too deep because you can dissect that number a million different ways, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. You divide that up by the number of days. That's a lot of calls we're going to in a day. And out of those 137,690 calls, 235 times did our officers have to use force to resolve the situation. So somebody was either resisting arrest or wasn't going along with the program, or they were assaulting us, that sort of thing. And we have those numbers I keep saying we like I still work there. I'm still getting used to this retirement thing.
That's true. It's pretty fresh.
Yeah. So, and I have, I have a person, it's a personal connection. I mean, I worked there for a long time, and it's very near and dear to my heart and who I am in my community. And so if I say we, just know I'm talking about.
Understood. I think the pronoun is appreciated by everybody. You earn that pronoun. It's kind of hard to extract from your vocabulary.
So you break down those 235 calls. This is pretty consistent over the years too. 2019 is not some anomaly. I mean, I've looked at the numbers going back. There are years that spike, there are years that are flat, but 2019 is just what's posted. But it's probably pretty average. But 4 of those 235, somebody was assaulting another person. 26 assaulting an officer. 6 harming oneself. 2 damaging property. 21 in progress crime or incident. And 163 resisting arrest or detention, and 13 threatening assault. So those are kind of how we get into those situations. Breakdown. But you look at the 235 compared to the 137,690, that's 0.17%. That's pretty slim when you look at it. You know what I mean? 0.17% of all of the calls. And we contact people on almost every call, multiple people. So when you take that number, even though it's just for us that 1 year, it doesn't paint a very convincing picture that the police are just out assaulting people all day long, which is kind of what, some people like to paint it as. And it's just not true. It's just not true. Do things happen? Absolutely. I wish that number was 0. I mean, ideally, I would love to go to 137,000 calls for service and never have to put our hands on anybody and still take care of the problem. But unfortunately, that's just not the reality.
No. And part of our discussion, again, which was brief about this, because I wanted to keep as much on camera as we possibly could. But the idea there, and to your point earlier around mental health, you mentioned that you would love to have more budget to align your men and women on the force with a mental health advocate or a social worker or a psychologist or whatever that situation would actually warrant. And then you also did mention that historically those budgets have been cut and or not funded to the point where they could be helpful for you to have these different aspects. And I think that on the positive side of the defund the police phrase, which I hate on just so many fronts, as an ad guy, I need to at least stop there. As an ad guy, the phrase bothers me so much because it's asking people to adopt a completely different understanding of the word defund. And then they get mad when you say, well, do you mean defund? And then some of them obviously do, and we'll get into that in a bit. But as it relates to defund, a lot of the proponents and advocates for police officers will say it's not about defunding, it's about additional funding. And so what did your funding specific to Santa Rosa PD look like historically as it relates to mental health and this kind of understanding that I think everyone can agree on is that we need peace officers should not be going to mental health calls or there's a lot of different things I think that they could be handled without the police department if we had additional budget. What does that look like? What does that look like historically?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm a big advocate for that. In fact, many of us have been big advocates for that for a very long time. So going way back, the county, so we're a city. Okay, we're an incorporated municipality, just like every other incorporated city in California. Okay, cities don't provide mental health services. That falls on the back of the county. The county gets funding from the state and from the federal government to do that. We don't have a human services department in the city, so we rely on the county to provide those services. And it's been spotty over time here in Sonoma County. At one time, we had a mobile support team, which was a group of 6 or 8. I don't remember the numbers. But just think about 6 or 8 people for a county of 500,000 people, right? That's not that many. But
hold on, they would 8 people total
on the mobile support. So those are folks that 8 to 12 hours a day would be available to come out and deal with a crisis in the field that we were dealing with, we would call them and they would come and either go with us or show up after we already got there. And that worked pretty well. I'm sure that resolved a lot of issues. They have access to their computer system where they can actually look the person up and see what the issue is. Yeah. But that program just kept getting cut, and it's still minimal for what we need. The police department is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? We're going to be here no matter what. We are the cheap solution. And people who are in charge of budgeting for things like a mental health response team or a mobile support team, I don't know if they just don't feel that I'm sure they don't feel that it's not necessary. It's extra. It's on top of what they're already doing. So it tends to kind of get cut first. And we would like to see that get a lot more funding.
So out of those 8 people that you had historically, when they cut it, what does that look like? You have 5 now?
Yeah, less people working less hours, and covering less geographical area. We're a big county, and granted, most of the people are in central Sonoma County and in the city, but we're going to calls that probably like 90% of the calls that we go to involve some sort of either mental health or substance abuse. Doesn't mean that it's the root of whatever's going on, or that it's associated somehow. And that's why we're there, because people are having issues.
And so if that's the majority of the calls you guys are going on, and this is a big part of the discussion now collectively, and I've read a lot of, again, we're not talking nationwide stuff, but a lot of the nationwide stuff specific to like NYPD, Minneapolis, Seattle, Portland, a lot of the things that were in the news lately, Ferguson, they all say the same thing, is that we need preventative measures for crime. And when you don't have the preventative measures around, poverty, inequality, homelessness, addiction, all of those pieces, those people are on the street. And because they don't have any budgets with not only Sonoma County, but other counties are saying the same thing, is that then the police department itself is the cheap solution? Is that what it is? Is that there's no one else to go and take care of these people, to arbiter domestic violence? Who are you
going to call? Right. You're walking down the street and you see somebody having a mental health crisis, right? Yelling and screaming, throwing rocks at passing cars, whatever it is. Who are you going to call? Do you pick up the phone and call the mental health department? No, you call 911, or you call the police department, and then we go out and see what the problem is. Get the person to stop throwing rocks at cars, or whatever it is that they're doing. Right? There's no other resource in our back pocket where we can go, well, this person's probably having a mental health crisis, so let's call over to this department, and they'll send a couple social workers out there to deal with it. That doesn't exist here. It doesn't exist in probably 99% of America. And ideally, it would be, I would like to see some sort of a joint response. Yeah, we'll go and make sure nobody's going to get hurt. But once we've settled the thing down, then we bring in somebody who's actually going to help resolve this person's issues, whatever. We want to help people. That's what we all signed up for.
Right. And then to take that to the next step, if you guys get called, I'm assuming you get called for people trying to harm themselves. I don't know who would call you, but
absolutely.
You guys are dealing with people that are harming themselves. And when you get there, what does that look like? It's just you. It's just the police. There's no one there on the mental health side. Do you then, is that where you, if you had additional budget, would call a psychologist? Or what does that look like?
Potentially. It depends on, there's so many different types of calls. Do we go to people who are threatening to shoot themselves and are barricaded in a room with a handgun held to their head? Yeah, we go to that. But we also go to somebody who just wants to talk to somebody. We go to where they've taken some pills. And we get most of those people, our officers get most of those people to the help that they need eventually. But when it doesn't rise to that level, when it doesn't rise to the level of someone actually going to hurt themselves or hurt somebody else, those are the ones where the solution is missing. Okay. Because in California, police officers can put people on a mental health hold, basically. It's called a 5150. Everybody's heard of it, right? But you have to be either a danger to yourself or danger to others or gravely disabled. A lot of the mental health calls that we go to, those factors don't exist. It's just below that threshold. And then we're stuck with, well, what are we going to What are we going to do with this person? What kind of help can we give them? And yet, can you take them voluntarily to the crisis stabilization unit? Yeah, you can. Problem is that they never have room. They've got 8 beds for the entire county. And so when you bring somebody there voluntarily, there's no obligation for them to even see this person or talk to this person. They just say, come back tomorrow, come back during business hours. That's not help. It's not help.
So
the system is broken.
Correct. So when you talk about the county, you mentioned Santa Rosa has about 180, 200,000 people. How big is the county that it has those 8 beds?
500,000.
500,000 people. Fuck. Okay, so you have 500,000 people with 8 beds. You were
8 crisis beds, yes.
8 crisis beds. Weren't you, as a lieutenant, the liaison with the mental health crisis stabilization unit?
Yes.
Okay. And in your duty for that, what encompassed your duty that way? What were you responsible for? What were you attempting to do to make it better? Or specifically, who were you working with in that unit? Was it a political head? Was it state government? Was it city? What
it's county. It's county, and it's the director of the crisis stabilization unit. And what my job is to be a liaison for our department so that we could have effective communication back and forth. I didn't have any influence on increasing their budget or anything like that. We were on the same page. Well, we both understood that the system is broken, and both of us were basically powerless to resolve that. We don't control the funding. We don't control, building new capital infrastructure to deal with people in mental health crisis. And the mental health system, I'm not even going to pretend to be any sort of an expert on it, but it's incredibly complex. I mean, incredibly complex. You're all the way up to dealing with people's insurance, and all those things influence what happens to a person, because somebody's got to pay for it, right? And people with insurance get treated differently than people that don't have insurance, and they go to different facilities and that sort of thing. But there's just a true lack of available resources for people who are in mental health crisis and need to be in a facility for some period of time until they can get treated, until their medications can get straightened out, that sort of thing. And there's no room at the inn, I guess is the way to put it. So in my role as the liaison, I would have talks with my folks. I would coordinate training to have their folks come in and give us updates on just little reminders on dealing with people in mental health crisis, and kind of paint the pictures for our frustrated officers who often put people on a hold for their mental health issue and then take them to the facility where we're supposed to take them. And there's, like I said, no room at the inn. So here's the other complicated part. Where do they go next? They go to the emergency department at the hospital. Okay, is that where we want to be bringing people in mental health crisis? Because they're dealing with people who are having medical issues. They don't have room, but they do take them.
They take them.
They do have psychiatric staff, but I guarantee, I'm telling you, they don't get the treatment that they would get at a proper crisis unit run by mental health professionals. They're getting placed in a room, and maybe in a few hours, somebody might come by and make sure they're okay. It's completely broken. And I'm sure Sonoma County is no different than any other county in California. The system is completely broken. Just ask any mental health professional. They will tell you the exact same thing.
And so you mentioned budget. These are out of your control. The liaison, the actual department itself. You're
talking about the crisis stabilization unit?
Yeah, the crisis stabilization unit. They need budget. You guys, the person there said they need additional budget. You agreed as the lieutenant in charge of the force, they need additional budget. Where is that budget approved? Or where is that?
County. It's at the county level, county board of supervisors.
Okay. And so considering how important this discussion is, and this is the one tenet of every discussion I've watched. I sat on numerous, I guess you'd call them like debate platforms, where they would have, like Vice News did a really cool thing. It had 7 officers from Detroit, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, New York City, and then some other areas, Cleveland, Baltimore. and they all said the same thing, is that everyone's talking about defund the police when not only does that phrase drive them crazy, it's that we need more money. And they all say the same thing. And that's weird. It's very strange when you can have someone represented from all different parts of the country. It's hard to get consensus on anything. But the one consensus that all of these police officers say is that the mental health issues are way underfunded. Not like 10% underfunded, but ridiculously underfunded. And so most of their time is dealing with the same people. And that's another thing they talk about, is you're dealing with the same folks. You're going back to these same homes. You're going back to these same perpetrators, if you will, right? You know them.
Anytime. And the frustrating part, Joey, is we go there. We know because we've been there before, and every time we go back, we still don't have any solution because there's nothing in our back pocket, right? I want to drag somebody. I want to call somebody. That call that I've gone to, a number of times where this person is just depressed and their living conditions are awful, but they don't rise to the level of actually removing them from the home. Who can I call? Because it's not in our tool bag. I mean, we can deal with the crisis part of it and get it stabilized and get the person calmed down, because we have a lot of training in that. We've been training de-escalation for long before de-escalation was a word. You know what I mean? I mean, we de-escalate all the time, especially with people in mental health crisis. But once we get to that spot, we got nothing for them. And that's the most frustrating thing in the world. I've got 180 officers who signed up to do this work to help people, and you can't help them. It's no different. It's a totally different topic. It's no different than the homeless crisis that we're having, right? We get sent all these calls of people behaving badly, and the advocates for the homeless call it harassment, but we're dealing with behavior issues, and we've got nothing for them. It's totally frustrating.
Well, I haven't seen the tent cities. As you know, I live in San Francisco, and there are numerous tent cities. There are numerous tent cities here, and I see peace officers all the time where they have to clean them up. So when I drive my kids to school, sometimes you'll see the vans and they're actually removing the tents, and because they have to clean it, right? It's a mess. But that's another piece to the issue, is that the police officers are the ones dispatched to take care of those folks as well. And so when you're talking about the de-escalation training, that is a theme that I've read about, and I actually put it in my notes to you, is accusation across the board that there's not enough de-escalation training. And I've witnessed in some of the platforms that I've sat on and listened to, and I've read articles, is that they said that de-escalation training needs to be enhanced because the peace officers themselves do not have the proper training to do that. So can you talk a little bit about de-escalation training? In your history, is it more today than it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago when you started? What does it look like, and how intense is it?
So it has a name now. Okay. We didn't use that phrase de-escalation over my career. It just wasn't a word. It wasn't a word. We used other words to describe it, And but we've always trained, at least here in California, to meet the training standards in California. My entire career, we have talked about starting everything at the lowest possible level when you can, right? Because sometimes the situation doesn't dictate coming in at the lowest level, right? You go to call a man with a gun, you're not going to start by, just walking in and saying, "Hello, my name is, could you please drop the gun?" Right? I mean, you're going to take a different approach. Same thing if two people are fighting, wrestling around on the ground, beating each other up, right? You're not going to start at that lowest level. You're going to start somewhere that's going to help, but you can always come down. And that's been taught my entire career. So it's nothing new to us, but I think that, and I actually think that police officers trained to the California standards of use of force are probably some of the best de-escalators in our community, because that's what they do for a living. They show up on things that are chaotic and they bring it down to a calm level. Sometimes the situation doesn't allow us to do that, but the vast majority of times it absolutely does. So I think we don't get enough credit for the de-escalation that police officers here in California do. But to go back to the training, do we need more training? Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. You can never do enough training on how to de-escalate a situation. And I'm talking about from the academy all the way through in-service training. So now that it has a name, and now that it's been brought to the attention of America, it's
the public.
I was going to say something else, but I'll refrain.
It's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a fucking word now. So now that we've been, like you said, it's an accusation. Like, you don't do enough of this. You don't do enough de-escalation. Okay, well, now it's got a name. So we're going to show you that we are going to do more training on de-escalation. But just know that it's been a part of our use of force training for as long as I've been around. And I know it was before that also. But like I said, can we do more? Absolutely. I think that officers need to train on that weekly, monthly, whatever. But it should be a part of the discussion all the time, because that's what keeps us from, it helps us resolve situations better, and it keeps us from getting in situations where somebody's going to get hurt, whether it's the officer or whether it's the other person. And that is always our goal.
And you mentioned there's a lot of continuing education. So is that part, de-escalation training, how many hours a year will your officers get? Is there such a thing?
Yeah, it is. I don't have the number off the top of my head. I would say probably it's at least twice a year that you go through that. That's one of those perishable skills trainings. So arrest and control use of force, and the de-escalation part of it is covered there. It's also covered in our firearms training, which is another perishable skill. Okay. That's at least a couple times a year. I don't remember exactly what the post standard is for it. I know it's at least twice a year, though. It might only be once, but I know we generally tried to train at a higher level than what post recommends or requires.
And I know that your bias and my bias is obvious. You know, I look up to you and I respect you, and I know you only work in Santa Rosa. But how do you? Can you compare the training, the budget, to your department, to other budgets and other departments? The numbers are pretty out of hand. I think is it 1 million? There's 1 million police officers in the United States. Yeah, there's 18,000 police departments in our country.
And Joey, most of those police departments are probably less than 20 officers. Okay. Most, like 90% of them. I don't know the exact numbers, but I feel comfortable saying like 90%. Santa Rosa would be in the top 5 or 10% for size. Wow. Well, think about it. Think about all your big cities, right? Yeah. You have your 2 or 3 really big cities in almost every state, right? And so that's like Los Angeles. That number to the 18,000 departments is a pretty small number. Santa Rosa is bigger than the capitals of several states. Sure. If you look at population, there are several states in the United States that the capital of those cities, the largest city, is less than 200,000. Okay. So when you really look at the numbers, we're actually a pretty good sized police department with 180 or so sworn. But most of those departments are tiny. And how do you keep that training consistent? How do you budget to train? We only have 10 officers. How do you even get those guys to training? Right? Yeah. You're doing it on overtime more than likely because you don't have an excess of people. So it's always a balance. And when you have a department our size, making training available during a regular shift is a little bit easier than it would be for a very small department. And those small departments are most of America. Okay. That's I didn't know that. Because with regards to that, the de-escalate, let's get back to the mental health training for a sec. Could you extrapolate what you think you'd need on that front? Because it's not just you. All the homework I did on this is that every single peace officer I've talked to, union members, politicians, they all think we need more. What number would that look like, just specifically to your department? I know you can't have it, but if you could say, I need this much money. Have you ever thought about that? Well, I mean, to be perfectly upfront, I never controlled our training budget. That just was never an assignment that I had. Okay. If you ask me about vehicles, I can tell you all about vehicle budget, but we're not going to talk about that. It's a lot. It's a lot because you're talking about, ultimately to do a statewide, a training course that was adopted by the Commission on Police Officer Standards and Training, California Post. it's a lot of money to create that course, and then to send every officer in the entire state of California to like a 40 or even maybe an 80-hour course to get them really indoctrinated in how to deal with people who are mental health crisis. Most people that deal with professionally deal with people in mental health crisis, those people generally have like a master's degree in that field.
In psychology, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I can tell you most of my police officers do not have a master's degree in psychology. Some of them probably do, but the vast majority of police officers in California are not as highly trained as a mental health professional. Yet, we're the ones they're calling.
That is an easy segue then. There was a discussion around college degrees. I know you yourself have a college degree. Do you think a 4-year degree that would be maybe a double major like in criminal justice and psychology, do you think something like that would help? If you had and I mean that as a criteria, like you need to have a college degree and or then maybe have something in psychology. Would that be a benefit, or is that just a bar too high?
I think it's a bar too high. I think you're going to get, if that was a requirement, our candidate pool for people qualified to do the job that we do would shrink enormously.
Okay.
It's certainly not a bad thing. I wouldn't say, oh, no, you don't, nobody needs that. Well, we have people with all kinds of college degrees coming to us. In fact, I think that probably most of our officers who are coming in now, a lot of them have college degrees. That wasn't the case. That wasn't the case before. When I got hired, the requirement was, and still is actually, a high school diploma.
That was it.
Requirement. But I can tell you, most of our people come to the table with an education, and it spans the gamut on what they got their degree in. I think, more importantly, I think, like I talked about earlier, I think some sort of a post approved mental health course that was put together by mental health professionals and taught by mental health professionals who also understand law enforcement, because that's the other key too, right?
Right.
You just bring in some people who don't understand what we do. You need people who are experts in the field and also understand how we operate, have some experience in how we operate, and collaborate and put together a course that really digs into how to deal with people having mental health crisis, emotional problems, things like that, depression, suicidal issues, that sort of thing, and train with scenarios. Create some realistic scenarios for people to go in and resolve. We've done that training before. I've done it 2 or 3 times over my career. So it's been done, but I think it needs to be done at a higher level. When you're dealing, if 90% of the calls that we went to dealt with traffic collisions, okay, would we be giving these guys tons of training in dealing with and investigating traffic collisions? Just as an example, of course we would. They'd be experts, right? Why aren't we doing that with mental health?
And the answer is money.
The answer is absolutely money.
Yeah.
There's no resistance to it. Nobody's going to say, no, I'm not going to send my officers to that. What you have to do, and I'll just touch on this real quick, especially with the smaller police departments, you have to create the training. You have to make it available regionally in a bunch of different places, like a travel and road show, goes all over the place. And then you have to pay all the expenses for those officers to go, including reimbursing the department to pay for the overtime to fill their spot while they're gone. That's how you get people to training. If you don't do that, you're not getting people to training. You can do all the mandates that you want. It's the same as unfunded legislation. When these jackasses in Sacramento create all these new laws for departments and cities and counties. Oh, now you have to do this. Well, that's going to cost a lot of money. Where's the money? Oh, well, you'll figure it out. That happens all the time. And there goes, well, we'll take the money out of this budget, or we'll take it out of this budget. So to do it, you're right. 100%.
That's what I was getting to earlier. So it's our body politic that's involved in this at the highest level.
Sure.
So everyone gets up, and this is politicians across the board. And I know we're on opposite sides of the aisle here, but across the board, everyone talks about mental health being a necessity, that we want to support the men in blue, men and women in blue. And yet, when it comes to actually approving budgets. Yeah, it's just like, go fuck yourself. Figure it out. And you can pull it from another budget. And this is across the board too. One of the young men from Baltimore, and I don't know how long it was, maybe 15, 20 years ago, he said he was making $800 a week take home as a peace officer. And it was because he was in a small department and they had no money. They were underfunded, understaffed. And that was every area: dispatch, police officers, mental health, vehicles. And he actually chimed in, because this is another question I want to get to. There was and maybe this is a good segue, is that there was a Intelligence Squared debate. And I think I've shared this with you too. Intelligence Squared is this debate in Britain that has 2 or 3 people on one side of the aisle and 2 or 3 people on the other, and then they have a moderator and they debate it. And the question there was, police are too militarized today. And since you were in charge of vehicles, let's talk about that for a sec. Dude, and again, we can just be specific to Santa Rosa. Was Santa Rosa Police Department too militarized?
No.
Yeah.
So a lot of that discussion comes from the government's 1033 program. And that's a program that allowed municipalities, counties, cities, states to receive certain surplus military equipment.
Yeah.
I know that our department didn't participate in that program for the last, I don't know how many years that I was there. I don't know about before I started paying attention to that. The only equipment that I saw in our department was some really super antiquated night vision stuff. And when I saw it, they were actually getting rid of it because nobody had used it for years.
Okay.
But, the accusations and the misconceptions about, they have a tank. Okay, that's not a fucking tank. All right? A tank has treads and a big fucking gun on it. Okay?
Yeah.
Police departments don't have tanks. We do have ARVs, armored rescue vehicles. Okay? We have one here in this county. That is an essential tool. If you want the police department to resolve barricaded suspect issues, let's say somebody, whether it's hostage or no hostage, let's just say it's a barricaded subject, going to kill himself or kill somebody else, doesn't like the police, doesn't want to go to jail, whatever the story is, right?
Yeah.
Why would you be against our officers resolving that situation close enough that they could actually communicate with the person inside a vehicle that is armored? What is wrong with that? Or what if we have a police officer who was one of the first responders and they got shot and they're laying on the ground between, in the front yard?
Yeah.
We don't get the use of an armored vehicle to go in there and rescue that officer. We have to just go ahead and do it. I mean, we already have bulletproof vests, right? That's the argument is, well, we already give them bulletproof vests. They can just run in there and no, we're going to use the everything to our advantage. But unfortunately, the narrative out there is, oh, they have a tank. And it's not a tank. I mean, just Google LAPD tank, and literally every picture that comes up, if you click on images, is of an armored rescue vehicle, not a tank.
And this is, when anything goes viral, and this is another thing that I witnessed within the police officers that were talking. They said in 2017, anything that goes wrong with any police officer in any department in any state is on steroids. And so then everyone says, oh, the police are bad across the board. The one thing I will offer up is that there was a tank used in Keene, New Hampshire. It had population 224,000 people. And it actually had an armed tank to guard the Pumpkin Festival. And the reason for that was, and again, it's an anomaly. I get it. But that was where people glom onto and say they had a tank at a Pumpkin Festival. So that was the 1033 stuff. They're also talking about bayonets, right? Because this is all part of the false narrative.
Yeah.
The police officers and departments have these tanks and they wear camouflage gear and they're carrying military weapons. What is the weapons? What weapons did you and your officers use, to be specific? Because that would be good to talk about.
Okay. So the standard issue on everybody's holster, their sidearm, their, what do they call it in the movies? Your duty gun, I guess you call it.
Yeah.
Your issued piece. We used over the last, I guess, like 10 years, we were issued a Glock 17, which is a 9mm.
Okay.
Just a standard, regular old 9mm. We also carry like an AR-15 in the car. It's semi-automatic, not fully automatic, and a shotgun, a 12-gauge shotgun, which we have. So those are the firearms, and we also have a 40mm in each car. I don't know if they have in every car, but almost every car, which is a 40mm. It shoots a foam projectile. It's about 40mm, about that big. Yeah. It's a foam baton round, basically. It's actually a very effective tool to help resolve situations.
For what? Like what situation would that tool be used for? Because
let's say you got a guy who is threatening to harm himself with a knife. He's got a knife to his throat. I'm gonna fucking kill myself. I'm gonna kill myself. Yeah. Would you rather run up to that person to stop them from killing themselves and maybe hit them with a baton or try to tackle them or something, or stand about 25 feet away and shoot them with a foam baton that's really going to stun them? Shoot them in the shoulder, shoot them in the thigh, somewhere that's big and meaty like that. And
so it just hurts. It's like it's like a really bad Charlie horse.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. That
makes sense.
A good tool. And then they're not used that much anymore because they were never that effective. The 40mm is a lot better, but we do have an additional 12-gauge shotgun in a lot of the cars that we shoot a beanbag round out of. Okay. And those rounds are to keep people from doing whatever they're doing when we don't want to jump right in there. When it puts ourselves or somebody else in danger, it allows us to kind of stun the person with something that's really just going to cause a pretty good bruise.
That makes sense. One of the things I wanted to share with the audience, and you probably already know this kind of stuff, but the examples on use of force, there was a couple, NYPD actually talked about this, is that use of force in the 1970s, we see no correlation to an increase in shootings. From 1971, police officers at NYPD shot and injured 221 people. By 2016, it was 72. In Chicago, between 1974 and 1978, police shot approximately 131 people. And in 2018, that was down to 43. SWAT, NYPD, in 2019, wasn't involved in a single shooting. So a lot of the things that we're seeing on the news as lay people is that our police are militarized. They're wearing camouflage. They're carrying military weapons. They have tanks behind them. And they are abusing people. Now, I will grant that there is some awful abuse out there, which we aren't going to get into because we talked about that. And there's racism within certain departments that has been proven. You guys in Sonoma County and Santa Rosa specifically, you have a 2% Black population?
That's probably about right for Santa Rosa.
Yeah. And
that's the number I remember.
Sonoma County, when I looked at it, was 26% Latino. Do you know what that was in Santa Rosa? Was that?
It's probably the same or higher. Probably higher.
So then a question I would have for you is, how diverse is the 180 people on your force?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have those numbers.
Okay.
I know, we have a lot of officers that speak Spanish, whether they come from whether they have that background or they're actually Latino themselves. I don't know. Okay. But I don't have those numbers in front of me, Joey.
Okay. No, and the reason I ask is because part of that is just with anything, any job even. I always talk about this with my career. In the advertising business, we like to have viewpoint diversity within the creative team. So if you're doing a campaign for, Coca-Cola as an example, and you're trying to figure out all the different demographics they have, it's usually good to have someone on your team that's gay, lesbian, Black, Hispanic, white. And the reason for that is that viewpoint diversity allows you to think differently and to approach the situations differently. And that's the reason I ask, because I know there's a pretty large Latino population there. And because their culture is different than Black culture, is different than Filipino culture, it seems at an intellectual level that is, advantageous to have people that understand the culture. And
absolutely.
Specific to like de-escalation and building trust within the police department, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's cool you didn't know. I didn't.
Yeah, no. Well, I can tell you, one of the things that we've done over the years is recruitment at different, whether it's an event in Roseland, which is probably our highest within the city Hispanic population. So we have done things like that. We advertise. We'll come and go through the process to get hired. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what else we can do. I don't know what else departments in California or across the nation, for that matter, can do to get a more diverse set of officers. But one of the things we can do is we can do diversity training, which we do. We talk about that. There's conversations about that. I think in all those categories that you just covered, who you wanted on your Coca-Cola advertising team, right? We have all those at our police department. The numbers are probably don't match what the population here in Sonoma County is, but we welcome diversity. I what I really loved. One of the things I really loved when I was doing things like planning the Cinco de Mayo celebrations. I was on the planning committee. Having those guys that are bicultural, having those guys that, I had an officer, he's now a sergeant, but he actually came here from Mexico. He crossed the border as a very young child and came into the United States and got his citizenship. And, now he's a police sergeant. Those guys are invaluable when it comes to relations with different communities, because they not only speak the language, but they also understand, the underlying culture, which is valuable. But we don't have that asset for every single culture that we possibly encounter. It just doesn't exist.
Well, yeah, and you can't, because that's another question. One of the jokes you made with me when we were having dinner is I told you I applied at Oakland PD in, I think it was 1991. And as you know, I had a history of fighting and a bad temper and a jacked up upbringing. So I got in way too many fights. And then as a martial artist, I enjoyed fighting. So I was, as an example, maybe one of the worst possible candidates. How do you screen guys like me out?
Well, you would have been easy. I'd have been like,
yeah,
no fucking way. This dude ain't going to be.
Yeah, that's why I didn't apply at Santa Rosa, because I knew you wouldn't let me in. But
yeah. So how do we screen? So anytime that you want to work for the police department, you go through, just like any job, you go through a set of hurdles that you have to go through to, it's a process. It's an application. It's an interview. You learn things on applications. You learn things during interviews that helps screen. I've sat on oral boards, hundreds of oral boards, sitting on the other side of the table from the candidate. And you can get a pretty good idea of whether somebody might be successful or not, just from asking them a number of well-suited questions. But
what does that look like? What is the oral board? How many of you are sitting there in front of this candidate?
It's, for us, I can only speak to our department. It's generally three. Three people on one side. It could be a police officer, maybe a sergeant, a lieutenant. It could be a dispatcher. It depends on who.
Is there any psych evaluation?
Yeah, so I'll get to that in just a second. But the oral board, it's a set of standardized questions. Everybody gets asked the same questions. I'll give you an example. Let's say I have it's going to be a different interview for somebody who already has police experience than it would be for somebody who's what we would call entry level. So entry level would be somebody they've never been a cop before anywhere, right? They're coming in, they want to get a job, get sent to the academy. So, a good question you might ask somebody like that is, tell me about a time that you made an ethical decision. And then they would be open to them talking about that. Tell me about a time that you resolved conflict. Because we want people who have done this stuff before, right? I don't want somebody who's never had conflict in their life. They're not going to survive being a cop, right? And so you learn a lot about people just by asking them some of those questions. If they do pass that, then they go on to the next process, and the next process is a background investigation. And you're going to get a form. It's probably electronic now. It's called a personal history statement. Okay, and you are going to list for us everybody that you know, all of your family, every job you've ever had, where you went to school, who your bosses were at those jobs. It's very detailed. And then the background investigator is going to go out and they're going to speak with all those people. So those people that you didn't write down, we're going to get their names from the people that you did write down, right? Because it's all interconnected. Of course, now social media is a big thing too, right? Because if you have a Facebook page, for example, I can go on look at your Facebook, see who all your friends are, and go, oh, maybe I'll go talk to that guy. Yeah. So it's just it's a way to look into, and of course, it's at your consent. You give us consent to go talk to these people. When you go talk to them, you hand them a piece of paper. It says, "Hey, Joey said that I can talk to you. Here's a piece of paper,"
right?
Waiving his rights to privacy or whatever.
Okay.
And so the background investigator will go talk to where you worked before, your next door neighbors. They'll walk down through your whole neighborhood. Everybody that lives in your building, if you live in an apartment building, and they're going to talk to all those people. And at some point, if there's something that you're hiding, it's going to come out.
It's going to come out. Okay.
It's going to come out. And then if something did come out, then there's a discrepancy interview where you would talk to the person about it. But it's pretty comprehensive. Once you pass the background, then you would be, if it was acceptable, you would be given a conditional job offer. And the conditional job offer is conditional on you passing a psychological exam by a psychiatrist, a medical exam by a doctor, and a polygraph exam by a certified polygraph examiner. And if you pass all of those things, then you would be given the job offer. So it's pretty comprehensive. Has it failed to weed some people out that probably shouldn't have been doing this job? Absolutely. Absolutely. Sure. And we've seen examples of that. I've seen examples of that. I would say that most of the people in my experience in my department who were terminated, it was for things that the public wouldn't even know about. In other words, it wasn't a public event. It wasn't something that went viral on social media. We've had a couple examples of those here in Sonoma County, not necessarily with our department, but most of the people that I saw terminated was for darn good reason. They should have never been a cop. And frankly, you could see it coming. You could see it coming. And people, I think there's a common misperception that police departments never fire anybody, and that's absolutely not true. That was actually another discussion in that Vice interview with the 7 cops. They said the same thing, that there are people in power who have people in higher power that sometimes should be fired and are not, but most of the time they try to get the assholes out, because it really reflects poorly on the department. And depending on leadership, right, that's a big deal. And again, your department is, which I'm just learning, is very large. And I think a great example of a department that's, while it's underfunded, it's still funded to the point where you can do all of these things and you have all of these. It's functional. Yeah. Functional, but not optimal. And I think you would probably see that same scenario in every department in California. I mean, there are probably some exceptions where the level of wealth and income in a particular city gives that department a lot more resources. I mean, I don't know what Beverly Hills PD's budget is, but I would imagine that they probably have a little bit more extra money than, say, Bakersfield. Yeah. Okay. Just do it. But that said, you started out at Belmont. Was that a chill place? Because it's obviously more affluent. Yeah. Was that different? Or did they have more budget there than you guys? I was a young cop at that time. That's true. Didn't have any idea what a budget was at that point. I just showed up, did my work, and got a paycheck. I was only there for like a little under 3 years, but yeah, a lot different in a more affluent community. It's a sleepy little town on the peninsula, and nothing ever happened there. I mean, once in a while something would happen, but I didn't learn very much about being a cop in that town of Belmont, because you go You'd work a 12-hour shift, 7 p.m. till 7 a.m. I remember I went a whole week one time and never even got sent to a call.
Wow.
I mean, but it wasn't always like that, but there were times like that. In Santa Rosa, that would be absolutely unheard of.
Right.
Completely unheard of. I remember
12-hour shift.
I remember working as a sergeant on a graveyard shift not too long ago. It was probably 2012, 2013, just before I got promoted to lieutenant. And I was working on Christmas Eve, and I'm looking at the screen. You think Christmas Eve, what the heck's going to happen at Christmas Eve? This is like 3:00 in the morning, Joey. Christmas Eve. The screen we had like 25 calls pending, and every single officer was tied up on a call. It's insane. So it gets crazy like that. It's not like that every night, obviously. There are times when it's pretty quiet here in town too, but much more than Belmont for sure.
Yeah. So here's a couple questions that I sent you that I got from. These are national questions. So if they're not applicable, just tell me to fuck off. But there's one that said a recommendation across the board from independent, I guess just independent politicians and counties was, is there any benefit to increase the use of special prosecutors in police misconduct investigations?
It's a big question.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you considering misconduct? I mean, if you're talking about,
they're talking about violent altercations, and obviously death is usually. I think that's what they were referring to in this case.
Yeah, and they're talking about that in California, if it hasn't already been instituted, is having a team from the Attorney General's office look into officer-involved fatal incidents. Yeah. We've been. I think it's pretty consistent around California. I think most cities and counties have some sort of a regional protocol for, let's say have an incident where, God forbid, one of our officers ends up killing someone in the line of duty for whatever the reason is or the circumstances are. We certainly never want to see that happen, but it does need to be investigated by somebody who has less of a connection with the officer than the people that work in their own department, because the feeling or the optics of bias or lack of transparency and whatnot would certainly look different. But there's a lot of people who are making the argument that's not even far enough. That's not far enough removed. We need somebody at a totally different level. The bottom line is these investigations are highly complex. I mean, we're talking about binders and not little binders of information. When you print it all out, the amount of investigation, the amount of questions that are asked, the amount of evidence, the amount of everything, binders of information, and that eventually, when the investigation is complete, that gets sent to the local district attorney, who reads all of that, maybe does some more follow-up investigation, and then makes a determination on whether or not the officer acted within the law. And that's kind of the big thing now is, are these investigations complete? Are they thorough? Are district attorneys making competent decisions on whether or not to file charges? Bottom line is, when these things happen, it's tragic. Yeah. There's not an officer that I've ever worked with who wants to kill anybody. It's not even a topic, right? I mean, we have to talk about it, but nobody wants to take another person's life. Why would anybody want to do that, right? If you want to do that, you should not be in this line of work. You probably shouldn't. Well, you should not be free. You should be in a mental health mental institution. Yeah, well, that's a good one. It's a very complex issue. I don't think anything's going to change. The bottom line is you conduct a complete investigation, and then it goes through a legal process where somebody has to take the facts of that case and apply the law to it and decide whether or not there's been a law broken, whether or not you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this officer did something wrong, that they broke the law, basically. Right. Now, parallel to that, there would also be an internal, potentially if there was an allegation that the officer violated a policy or there was misconduct and what happened, there would be a parallel internal investigation. But those two things are separate, because an internal investigation, the end result of that has to do with your employment, not whether or not you get charged with a crime.
Got it.
Two different things. Okay. The police department is an employer. When we think, just like any employer, doesn't matter if you're a restaurant or a police department, if you have an idea that one of your personnel that works for you has done something wrong within their course of employment, you're going to conduct an investigation, and then you're going to maybe take some action, right? Could be a written reprimand. It could be termination. Anywhere in between, there's a lot of different things, depending on the severity of it, whether or not it's happened before. A lot of different things come into play there. But just remember, those are two totally different things. One is a criminal investigation because somebody died at the hands of another, and we have to determine how that happened and why that happened, and whether or not somebody is criminally liable for that. I'm not talking about civilly liable, because that's a completely different thing. We can talk about qualified immunity here in a little bit.
Yeah, that was one of my questions.
Yeah, I saw that on there. So I guess what the point I'm trying to make is that process is still going to take place, whether it's a team from a neighboring agency doing that investigation, or a couple different agencies. You might build a team with, in our county, you might have 2 detectives from Petaluma, 3 or 4 from the sheriff's department, 1 from Roanoke Park, and they're all going to work together on the shooting that occurred within the city of Santa Rosa, one of our officers. Same thing if it was a Petaluma officer. It's a multi-agency team that we can put together to kind of make that investigation a little bit more independent. So giving that to somebody at a state agency higher up, I don't know what difference that's going to make. Giving it to a state prosecutor as opposed to a local county prosecutor, I don't know if that's going to make a difference, but the process is the same regardless. There's no...
I guess the only thing that I could glean from that would be that the local prosecutor might be friends. There might be some kind of, bias there. I'm just pontificating.
Have you met RDA? Nobody's friends with her. I'm just kidding. No, I hope you don't see this. I'm just kidding.
But so my understanding of internal affairs kind of stems from Hill Street Blues. That's about all I got. So what does that what does that mean? What does internal affairs look like within your department? Okay. I don't understand it.
So yeah, you always see it on the crime movies and these cities, right? Everybody's
Law and Order too. I got Law and Order.
Yeah, everybody hates that too. Everybody hates the IA guys.
Yes, yes, that's all I understand about that IA guys, because they're in suits and the cops hate them. That's on TV. That's right. That's what takes place.
It creates good TV. So we have Santa Rosa Police Department has a professional standards team. Actually, it's not really a team. It's a sergeant, and overseen by a lieutenant and ultimately a captain. And what the professional standards team does is they conduct internal affairs investigations. And when you say an internal affairs investigation, that is exactly what I just described when we were talking about the officer-involved shooting. It's an internal investigation. Could it end up being criminal? Absolutely. Right. But that's going to be a separate process. So you have an allegation. Let's say you have an allegation of, I'll actually use a real example. This happened a long time ago. A female who had been arrested and is now out on bail or whatever comes to your department and says, I got arrested the other night and the officer, when taking me to jail, pulled over to the side of the road and sexually assaulted me. Okay, this was long before body-worn cameras, so it's a little bit different animal. But that would potentially create 2 different investigations: your internal investigation, which is going to deal with your employment status, depending on what the result is, and then a criminal investigation because it's a criminal allegation. Okay, but let's say we don't have a criminal allegation. Let's just say that let's just say that the officer got into a vehicle collision. Okay. We're not supposed to crash cars. We've got to figure out why you crashed a car and whether or not it's your fault. And if it is your fault, then there potentially could be some discipline because we can't have you out there crashing cars. All right. And let's say that exact thing happened. Somebody backed into a mailbox or something, caused damage to the car, because we have a city policy that says that you have to take care of your equipment and not crash into stuff, it would be a violation of that policy. I don't remember the exact words of it, but you're supposed to drive safe. We have a policy that says you have to drive safe and not get in accidents.
Right.
Is it going to happen? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that investigation would determine whether or not you were at fault. There'd be a collision investigation also, whether or not there's anything you could do to prevent that collision. But within that internal investigation, there's no crime alleged here, right? Running into a mailbox is not a crime unless you do it on purpose. You would also be looking at past behavior. So you open up the officer's personnel file and you go, oh my gosh, this officer has crashed 17 cars now over the course of their 25 years, right?
Yeah.
I think this probably should have been taken care of a long time ago, but you're looking at somebody with like 4 or 5 crashes in the last 4 or 5 years. I'm not sure we can continue to employ this person, right?
Right.
So we have to determine, have they had the proper training? So all these things are contained in this. And then the chief ultimately, actually in our department, the captain makes a recommendation of discipline, and then ultimately the chief does that. And it's a whole process that's kind of also governed by the government code in the police officer's Bill of Rights on how this investigation takes place. There's some certain practices that we have to abide by. Simply giving advisements. It governs when you can do the interview and who can be there, how many people can be there, that sort of thing. They're entitled to representation, whether that's someone from their union or an attorney. That would depend on the severity of it. But that's really what an internal affairs investigation is. You're looking into the person's conduct on duty, figuring out if they've done something, violated policy or law, and then taking the appropriate action afterwards.
And this is because of the word internal, it actually means what it means. These are people that are employed by Santa Rosa Police Department, correct?
Yeah. And I will tell you that there are small departments across California who often use an outside investigator.
Okay.
A lot of times those are retired police officers who probably work for internal affairs and have the whole process down. And rather than taking somebody, you got a department of 10 people with 4 sergeants, who are you going to pull off the street to do this complex investigation? Right. How are you going to fill their spot? But the larger departments like ours, we have a person to do that. That's all they do.
All right. That's cool. Well, you mentioned it, and we talked about this before. Body cameras.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, again, the narrative out there is that cops turn off their body cameras before they go. And again, I tried to do my homework across the country. And the one thing this is another consistency from the policemen that I watched through my interviews, is that they all thought that the body cameras were their friend.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So why don't you talk about that too? Because I didn't hear the opposite. I didn't hear that they wanted to shut them off because it's my word against theirs. And if I have actual video of what took place, it's to my benefit.
Absolutely. It took a while to get there, though. So you think about a guy like me who, let's see, it's probably, I think trying to think what year we fully had the department equipped with the correct body-worn cameras, but it was like 2018, 2019, something like that.
Wow. That recent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to money.
Right. So that was it before. They didn't have it because of money.
Oh, it's expensive. There's still departments that don't have it because of money. It's incredibly expensive.
Jesus. Okay. Yeah, that's just insane.
And there's no funding to pay for it. But anyway.
That's insane. Yeah, I know that's a whole other fucking topic. But
you picture a guy like me who's got, 20-something years on. I've been doing this. I've been pushing a patrol car around for 20-something years, been a detective. You want me to do what? You want me to film myself doing all this stuff? So there was definitely some...
Did that bother you at first?
Oh, it bothered a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
You, right? Think about someone following you around and literally recording everything you do at work.
Yeah, that'd be weird.
Yeah.
Well, I would be outed for not doing anything, and I'd be fired.
Well, there you go.
The ad business. You don't do anything too much. It's like, I know.
Well, that was probably a concern for some people too. But it didn't take long for officers to realize that this thing was their friend, that they can do their job while being recorded, and that people they know you have a camera, right? They're going to go, well, where's the recording? If there's no recording, it didn't happen. I mean, that's the way this new generation is, right? I mean, if they don't capture it on their iPhone, it didn't.
Right. It didn't exist. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why they watch concerts like this.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So that resistance over the course of probably a couple years turned into your senior officer coming into the sergeant's office going, "A body camera doesn't work. I can't go to work."
Oh wow! So it completely did 180.
Yeah, okay. Completely flipped. And there were some hurdles that we went over in the beginning because you have this new thing. Well, what's our policy going to be on it? And everybody's in the same boat. Like, what do we put for a policy? Like, what are we instructing these officers to do? Do they have it on from the moment they start their shift to the moment they end their shift? Well, of course not. Number one, the battery isn't going to last that long.
Right.
And number two, I mean, you got to go to the bathroom, right? You got to, maybe make a phone call on a break to a loved one, parent. We're going to record all of that? No, of course we're not. That's ridiculous. Yeah. So what is our policy? Do you turn it on when you get dispatched? Do you turn it on? Can you turn it off? That was another thing. I think it was I think the incident was in Sacramento where that was really a point of contention because as soon as they had done something, they were talking about turn your camera off, and probably wanted to talk about something. I have no idea, but we had to get into that as well. So what we ended up with, and I'm assuming the policy is still the same, we eventually got to the point where you turn your camera on when you're sent to a call or you are talking with somebody or initiated contact with somebody. And even that sounds really clear, right? Well, what if
So when you get to the call, as an example, you're dispatched, you drive to the actual incident. At that point, you get out of your car, hit record. That's what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
So when you're constructing a policy, though, it just takes a while to get through some of the little stuff. So if I tell you have to turn your camera on every time you contact somebody, does that mean that if you're working at the Sonoma County Fair on overtime and somebody comes up and asks you, where the merry-go-round is, you have to turn your camera on. Right. So you kind of get through that.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And then leaving it on during the entire contact. So from the beginning of the call to the end of the call, because what was happening initially was you'd have your camera on, you get to the call, you get everything kind of resolved, and then you get kind of control of the whole thing, maybe a couple other backup officers there, and then the main officer would go over and kind of strategize, like, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to take this guy to jail. We're going to, I need you to collect some evidence. Whatever that conversation is, they were turning it off to have that conversation because they didn't want to memorialize kind of their whole thought process. But we eventually got to a point where everybody now realizes that you want to memorialize that whole thought process. Okay. Because when you're talking about an incident that's going to end up, let's say, in federal court 2 years from now, okay, somebody is going to want to know, because something bad happened, somebody's going to want to know what your thought process was. Because if you don't leave that part in there, that leaves room for anybody, whether it's a defense attorney, the public, whatever, to just insert whatever they think happened during that time that the body-worn camera was off, which generally is something like, well, that's when they plan to kill my client.
Right.
You know what I mean? Right. And that's certainly not the case. So it's pretty ironed out now. They're on through the entire contact, and everybody's pretty much used to it. I can tell you from a management standpoint, it's a great thing to have, whether you're investigating a complaint. I mean, our sergeants now can take a phone call. Somebody complained, oh, the officer was rude to me on this traffic stop, gave me a ticket, called me an asshole, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's great.
Let's go
bring it up on the computer. Call him back. No, he didn't.
Thanks for coming. No, he didn't.
And that's really how they've become the best friend of a lot of the officers out there, because when they get complaints, because everybody loves to complain about cops. Cops are rude. They called me names. He didn't do his job. Whatever it is. Now we'll just go back and look at it on the body-worn camera and go, yeah, that's not how it happened. Or that is what happened.
Right.
Now we need to resolve it. And whether that's informally or formally or whatever it is, depending on the severity, it gives, as a manager, as a supervisor, it's an invaluable tool for dealing with that kind of stuff. And we at one point also had an auditor that we that we contracted with, and he would come. He wasn't an employee of the department. He actually worked he was an attorney and worked for the city manager, but he's no longer there, and I think they're trying to refill the position. But he would come in and just go through and watch body-worn camera video like randomly just to see what he could see. Or we would ask him, "Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this call? Do you think am I in left field here, or are you kind of on the same opinion that this shouldn't have happened the way that it happened?" So that was pretty valuable to have. But the camera themselves are they're part of our culture now.
Yeah,
everybody expects it. I mean, if you go to if an officer is testifying to something that they witnessed, saw happen, whether it's like a fight, whatever it is, and it goes to court, and an officer testifies, there's 12 people in the box over there that want to know where the video is, because that's their expectation now. That's the public's expectation is, where's the video? Because if it wasn't on video, then how am I supposed to believe that this actually happened?
Right.
And it's sad that we've gotten there, because we went from a place where the public would believe a police officer. If you get up on the stand and you testify to something, there's probably a little bit higher level of belief. There was, and I'm not sure that exists today for a lot of our society without the video.
That's a good question in the sense that, as someone who spent 27 years on the force and rose through the ranks from actual field officer to lieutenant, do you feel just within your city that trust in the police department itself has diminished?
I think yes, I do, but I also think a lot of that has to do with more people's experience with media and social media as opposed to their actual experience with. Right. A lot of people go their whole life and never have any contact with the police whatsoever. Maybe they got a ticket from somewhere, and that's going to be their entire experience, right? That's all they know, because that's what happened, whether it was good or whether it was bad or whether it was indifferent. And today, with the way the media is and social media is, you get the opportunity to experience everyone's angst, right? And people don't tweet about that officer that just gave them a break, right? Or the officer that helped find their lost child, or the officer who bought them a cup of coffee, or whatever it is, right? Those aren't the things that get tweeted out. Those experiences that people are sharing are negative experiences. And so you're with an ad background, and you're smarter than I am anyway. You probably understand that whole mechanism and how that affects your thought process and gives you biases.
Well, that goes into the media business in general. If it bleeds, it leads, right? Yeah. And then that even goes into the psychology of the brain.
Yes.
So the brain itself registers negative more so than positive. And it does that because of our evolutionary biology, right? You need to be, hey, that thing over there with those big teeth, that can kill me.
Right.
So I'm going to remember that more than I remember someone making a compliment. And I think that is another thing I saw across the board in my homework with all the police officers and all the debates I watched, and then some of the stuff I read, was that some of them actually left the force because of this. Sure. There was a couple black officers that they thought they would be, I don't want to say excluded, but they thought maybe specifically in counties and departments that had some issues around racial issues specifically, they thought, well, I'm black, they're not going to come after me. And they did. And that was even more scary in the sense that when you lose sight of everything you guys do, and I think that's, again, my bias is obvious, I think, but the idea for me was to try to figure out through this conversation, what's the reality of the defund the police motive? Because there isn't anybody who is attempting this at a constructive level that will say we need to defund anything. And that goes to the military budget. That's another narrative that's just crazy. Like, to your point, you don't have tanks, and so you don't need to defund the tanks. You don't need to defund the AR-14s. You don't need to defund your Glocks. Those are weapons you need to do your job. And the same thing stands true with the narrative out there that cops are turning off their cameras, and cops are turning Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you can keep going. All right.
All right, we're back. So yeah, I think that's another thing I wanted to address with this chat is the difference between what's going on in the media. And I understand the media, because in the media, if we repeat something, and this is a mythical number, but 7 times, when you hear something 7 times, then it becomes sequential and your brain recognizes it. And that's kind of what you're hearing around the cameras. You're hearing around the militarization of the police, the fact that you don't have enough training. One thing that everyone agrees on is the mental health. Oh, actually, before I forget, qualified immunity. That was a question that it was bandied about. Why don't you explain what that is first, and then how it's applicable to you and your experience?
Well, let me ask you this. What is your understanding of it?
I don't get it.
You don't get it?
No.
Okay. First of all, so I'm not an attorney. So it's I'm not going to be able to really dig down into the legal doctrines of it. But what it boils down to is a public employee cannot be civilly liable for a violation of someone's constitutional rights if whatever they were doing was they were acting in good faith, essentially. That's very simplistic. There's more kind of prongs to it than that. But basically, if I was doing my job in what would be looked at from a reasonable person in my same position, a reasonable officer, what I did during that time, let's say it's totally fictitious, but I get out of the car, I'm on a call, somebody points a gun at me, I pull out my gun, we get in a gun battle, and I shoot and kill this person. Totally fictional, okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to get, the department, the city, we are going to get sued in federal court for violating the deceased person's civil rights, okay? They're going to claim that it's a Fourth Amendment violation.
Okay, that's where I got lost when I was reading this. That's why I don't get it. How is that? How can the department be sued for that?
Oh, have you never seen these attorneys on TV?
I have, but there's no.
It's an industry.
Yeah, that's what I don't get is you didn't violate anyone's constitutional amendment when you're in a gun battle.
Well, they will claim that you did, though. Absolutely, 100%.
Okay, but that's where I got lost in the narrative, in the literature. I didn't get it.
Joey, every police department there's not a police department in California that doesn't have at least one, if not dozens, of federal lawsuits pending against them.
For that exact kind of fictitious.
For everything. You name it. Everything. Okay. It's like my former chief used to say, we'd be having a discussion and like, oh yeah, they said they're going to file a federal lawsuit. And the chief would say, get in line.
Okay. All right.
Because it's just part of what we're always getting sued. Always. Cities, police departments, counties.
But I guess the reason I brought it up is because that's part of the defund, abolish police type of narrative, is that you guys are protected by this.
So
I don't get that either.
So we are, if personally, if we are acting in good faith, if we're following standards. Let me give you an example. So years ago, going way back, this little company in Arizona invented this thing called a Taser. Okay. And the Taser, when it first came out, it's yellow. It's got darts on wires that shoot out, and you can incapacitate somebody without having to beat the living crap out of them with a baton, which happens sometimes, right? I mean, you got a guy that's 3 times your size. He's on LSD, and he just wants to kill everybody within his vision. Yeah. This gave us a tool to help us resolve things, right? And so as we started using these things, we realized how incredibly important they were, because we could incapacitate somebody and they essentially were uninjured for the most part, or a lot less injured than they would have been if it had gotten into a hands-on fist fight, less officers getting hurt, because we're trying to avoid that, right? So we got this great tool that I know this is going to go south. He's failing to obey my orders. He wants to fight. He's, got a knife in his hand, whatever it is. Boom, I pull the trigger, incapacitated, run the thing for 5 seconds, throw the handcuffs on, and the problem's resolved. Okay, I'm totally simplifying it, but that's kind of in a nutshell how the Taser was introduced to us. And it works. It's very effective. Over time, because some cops are just dumb, they create new case law, okay, by doing stupid things. So at some point down the road from when we got the Tasers, it was decided in a federal court that we really should not be using these things on basically passive resistive people. Okay, so if they're just not going along with the program, but they're no threat, like, no, you're going to jail, you need to get up, you need to stand up, you're going to jail, there's no fight or anything.
Right.
You can't use a Taser to incapacitate them at that point because they're not actively fighting you. They're not actively doing anything. So that became kind of the new rule now, right? So that person, that officer in that case right there was granted qualified immunity because there was no case before that said it was wrong for you to shoot somebody who's passively resisting. Okay. But now we have that case. So now if an officer uses a Taser on somebody who's passively resisting, they'll lose their qualified immunity or could lose their qualified immunity for that because it's already been established that you cannot do that. So that's where it weighs into, was it reasonable? So if officer today does that, you got a protest or something, people are locking arms and they use a Taser on somebody like that. The court, when it gets to federal court, they're going to look at it and go, okay, we got to deal with qualified immunity. Has this ever happened before? Why, yes, it has. And we told everybody in law enforcement, don't do this anymore. So you were not acting reasonably when you did this because we've already had this go to court. It's already been decided at a federal level that you guys can't do this anymore. And so that's part of those legal updates that you saw on like my training sheet. Yeah. That's just what we learn over time. And that's a very simplistic answer. But basically, if you do something, get sued in federal court, and it's determined that it was reasonable and lawful, and there's no case before you or before that told you not to do that specific thing. In other words, the set of facts match, and you should be aware that you can't do that anymore. If that doesn't exist, then qualified immunity sets in. Your department, your city may still lose a civil lawsuit and pay out millions of dollars, but the officer who did that would not be personally liable. In other words, I can go out and do my job and I don't have to fear, if I do my job right, if I'm doing my job legally within the Constitution and within the confines of well-established case law, playing by the rules, doing everything right. If I go out and do my job like that, I don't have to fear that in 2 years when this court case goes to federal court, I don't have to fear that I'm going to lose everything that I own, take my house, take my cars, take my life savings.
Right.
How do you do your job living in that fear, right? I'm Officer X. Let's say I got 20 Officer X. Greatest officers, they do everything. They play by the book. They're smart. They understand the law. How are they going to go out and do their job knowing that if some court decides that they shouldn't have done what they did, even though they thought it was reasonable, that they stand the chance of losing everything they own? That's what the qualified immunity is there to protect. And it's not just cops. It's all government. It's anyone in government. Government is the only entity that can violate your civil rights. Okay? Like you own a grocery store, you can't violate people's civil rights. I mean, you can violate ADA laws and things like that, but only the government can violate your civil rights. Okay? And that's generally, most of it falls within the Fourth Amendment. Your right to be free from illegal, unlawful searches, seizures, things like that. So, and that would be with an arrest or a use of force. A use of force is a seizure of a person. And so what you go to court on, what you get sued for is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. You violated that person's Fourth Amendment rights by shooting them, by falsely arresting them, whatever it is. And so, the argument against qualified immunity is there's no accountability. Cops never get held accountable for anything. And that's, frankly, it's not true. There's a whole process for that, whether it's criminal.
Is it similar to the one you talked about before as far
Absolutely.
as you have external, internal investigations, criminal, the attorney general, not the attorney general, but the prosecutor?
Well, you might have the attorney general. You might have the United States Justice Department. That's exactly what happened in Ferguson, Missouri. After that was all over, and the Obama administration ordered their Department of Justice to conduct their own investigation into what happened in Ferguson. Right.
Right. So that's where I'm lost because I just didn't get. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say nobody remembers that report because they really never, although they publicized it. That's a good read. Take a couple hours and read it. Read it sometime, and you'll find out that the United States Department of Justice under President Obama conducted a very thorough investigation into Ferguson. You'll also find that they found that the officer did absolutely nothing wrong.
Okay,
even though that's not the narrative.
Well, and that's actually why I wanted to have this chat with you, is because it's difficult to understand everything that's going on. This is a very complex topic, and in qualified immunity, when I admitted, I just didn't get it. Because I still to this point, and I appreciate you explaining it to me, because in business, we have something called the corporate veil, which is very similar. And that was the best thing I could look at as far as analogies, is that when I started companies in the past, you incorporate. And once you incorporate a business, you are protected from liability exposure to your stuff.
Right. Personal
company. Yeah. If your company gets sued or something happens and you have to go bankrupt, you don't lose your house and your home and your investments and all those things. And that's where I thought, that's why I just didn't see the fact that qualified immunity was somehow a pejorative. It just didn't, to me, if you're following the law, and it looks like from these examples anyway, is that you're still under all of those guidelines. You're still under all of those laws. Right. Including the Constitution. And if you are caught doing something, you will be arrested. And that's the whole point. And then are you civilly liable? Let's just say you did, in that example, do something illegal, and you've already established through qualified immunity that you've already established through precedent that you can't do that, the tasers. Can you then lose your stuff?
Sure.
Yeah. So then I don't understand.
It's qualified. It's immunity that's qualified.
Yeah, exactly.
By the fact that if you did the right thing and followed law and it was reasonable, then you can be immune from civil liability. It's not absolute immunity. There's no such thing in our world as absolute immunity. I can't just run out and do anything I want and go, can't sue me. It's qualified that we were legitimately doing our job. Police officers are out there on the street literally making decisions in split seconds. Okay. Yeah. How do you do that? How do you make a decision in a split second, knowing that this 1/10 of a second that I'm living through right now could literally affect whether or not I have a place to live somewhere down the road, or whether or not I have any money in my bank, or whether or not my marriage is going to be still there, whether or not my children will be able to survive. If I don't have a job and I don't have a house and I've lost everything, how do you make a critical decision with that hanging over your head? It's nearly impossible. I don't want to protect bad cops. I don't want to protect cops that are breaking the law. Nobody wants to work with those people. But in order to do our job effectively, it plays a big part.
Well, it's the same thing with companies. There's no one. I don't think anybody in the corporate world would start a company if they didn't have the corporate veil to protect them, because it's the same thing. Why would you put yourself out there? You just go get a job. You wouldn't start a company and then get sued and lose everything.
Yeah. Let your boss take on all the liability. Just give me a paycheck.
Exactly.
That's all I want.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
But people don't see it. They get caught up in the words immunity. Oh, they're immune. They can't ever. No, they can. And cops do get fired and they do get arrested.
Well, dude, this was really helpful for me, and I think my listeners will agree. And
all 10?
I have 18 now.
Okay.
So, yeah. And but thank you for your time and energy. And I know that a lot of these subjects are contentious in our culture, but I think in part because we don't understand them. We don't understand the training you guys go through. We don't understand the day-to-day machinations of your job, the stress, the psychological stress, and the emotional and physical and all of that. So thanks for doing all that you did for 27 years. And thanks for your time and energy here.